A lot of time spent with data is spent cleaning the data. What I mean by this is removing the null values or the outliers or the rows with missing data. Cleaning the data is important if you plan to run it through any functions or operations because more often than not it won't work if you have messy or inconsistent data. You will read in various blog posts that data analysts spend 80% of their time cleaning the data and only 20% actually running operations on it. From my limited experience, this isn't far off. First, let's start out by looking at dropping rows, which is a good way to help us clean the data. The most common need to drop a row is if it's empty and thus not important to us. As if Pandas knew exactly what we needed, it provides a dropna method to help with this specific need. So let's import Pandas, and we're also going to import numpy as np. And let's create a data frame with Lakers data. Here I have some raw data where I've gone in and added some np non, that's a numpy non-values. And let's go ahead and create a Lakers data frame. Again, passing in our raw data and giving it the column names that we want. So if we look, we have here that has some rows with all non-data and some rows with a couple non-data values. So we are going to use the dropna method. And when using the dropna method, there are two parameters to pay close attention to. The first is our recurring axis argument, where again, 0 is for rows and 1 is for columns. So this would be axis equals, and again, 0 for rows, 1 for columns. The second is the how parameter, which will take any or all. So if we say any, that means if any of the rows values are non, it will drop the row. If we say all, then that means all of the rows values have to be non for it to drop. The default value is any, so to change it to all, we must explicitly write it. So let's go through an example with our Lakers df. So our Lakers data frame. And again, I've just inserted some non-values for the example. Now, say we want to drop all the rows where there is a missing value, aka a non-value. We can pass the any, and again, the axis will be 0 to signify rows. And let's call this just a clean df1, and we'll run it. And again, if we look at our new data frame, it should drop all the rows where there are any non-values. And we'll see just the first two rows are the only ones where there were no nons, so those are the only two left. But let's say instead we only wanted to drop the rows where all of the values are missing. Again, let's save this as a new one, and we're going to change the how to all. So now if we go back to original Lakers data frame, this should only drop the following row. So let's run it. And let's inspect. And you'll see we still have the rows where there are a single non-value, but we did drop the row that had all non-values. This is a common step early in the data cleaning process. We will generally run through this to clean up the data immediately after importing it. Pandas has methods that even help to identify which rows and columns have missing values and how many there are. Since we are pulling rather clean MBA data, we aren't going to go deeper into this, but I advise poking around the internet for more information. Now, we can also remove a row based on a missing value in a single column. To do this, we use our dropna method, but utilize our subset parameter. In the subset parameter, we pass the column name we want to check against, or a list of columns we want to check against for non-values. So for instance, let's say what we cared about was the games played column, and we wanted to look at clean df3, and that will equal our Laker df dropna. And this time the parameter we're going to pass is going to be subset, and that is going to be telling Pandas to only look at the games played column. So if we run this, you'll see if any non-elements were in the games played column, we're going to drop that row. So we only have LeBron, Lonzo, and Kuzma. And this was, since we did not give it a how parameter, it defaulted to any, which is why we only see these 3 rows. There may also be times where you don't want to drop the rows with null values, but instead fill them in with numbers so your functions don't generate errors. To do this, we can use the FillNa method. So, for instance, if we had our Laker data frame instead of the dropna, let's call the FillNa. And the first parameter for this method is the value, which is what we want to replace the non-values with. So if we wanted to instead replace the non-values in our original Lakers df with, let's just say 0, we would pass in a 0. So updated df1, and we run this, and we should see all of our non-values turn to 0 instead. There are times when we will want to add rows to a data frame. To do this, we will use the append method. This method will append the rows at the end of the data frame. So let's walk through an example. Say we have a data frame with some points per game stats on LeBron James' recent seasons. So here we have LeBron James, his season, and the points per game. We're going to save that into a data frame, and let's just print it. Next, we create another data frame with stats from his 2016 and 17 season. So here again, I have a data frame, and this I am passing in his name, season ID, and points per game with the columns the same. Run this, and let's just look at it again. Just a 1-row data frame. And if we wanted to add the second data frame to the first, we can use the append method. This will work because the columns of the data frame are the same. So if we have a df new, we can just run the first one, dot notation append, and the argument is going to take is the data frame you want to add. So this is going to take this df2, append it to df1, and it will add the rows at the end. And let's just check it to make sure that's the case. And it is. Great. Let's go look at one last special parameter before we go more in depth to the Pandas library.